Hi, Sue. Very welcome to Impact Design. I'm so excited to interview you today. I mean, you have been like at the forefront of spa and wellness for decades now. I don't want to say how many, but I cannot think of anybody more than you that has influenced the sector as much. So let me just start, with giving you a bit of introduction yourself about your, like your background.
Oh, Yasmin, thank you so much. Good to be here. Well, my background's long, so I'll be as quick as I can. It's 50 years, actually, so that'll give you a clue. I started as a features editor of Vogue in London in the 60s. In the 70s, I moved with my family to New York and then to Canada. I could act as a journalist in New York, but in Canada, there was nothing. In those days, I'm talking 1968. So I opened a hair beauty, you would call it today a day spa. I had 80 staff, a lot of Eastern Europeans. So English hairdressers, Eastern European therapists, and I learned a huge amount from them. That business was turning over about $4 million in 1970. And 1974. Then in 1980, I sold it and I moved back to the UK with my children. I wanted them in school in London. And I went to run a health farm. And in those days, that was what we would probably now call a destination wellness resort. It was based in 50 acres. We had doctors, nurses, physio, yoga, Pilates, way before anybody was talking about any of it. And the minimum stay was 7 days. And I was there for many years while my children were at school in the area. And then I got headhunted as managing director of a company designing spas for the cruise liners. So there were 150 ships and 1,100 therapists at sea. And that was an era when the cruise liners suddenly were getting into the spa industry. I didn't like that industry. It was too mass for me, and getting the training standards and things like that were difficult. So in 1989, I started my own consultancy. I'd obviously learned huge amounts from the North American concept of beauty and hair and spa was just about starting. And then by running the health resort, I had learned the medical side as well. So integrative medicine's always been my passion. And in 1989, nobody, certainly in the UK and Europe, was talking or using the word spa or wellness. It just wasn't even a concept. So when I started the consultancy, my first projects were very much ahead of their time, way ahead of their time. So if you think of hotels back then, that was an era when hotels had gyms and pools, and that was about it. And a few people were beginning to add massage, but there was no concept of customer journey, quality of standards, and all of that stuff. So I was way at the forefront of that. I actually also forgot that I had a very short time managing a thalassotherapy center in France. So that was a different learning curve because it was the medical side of seawater and marine and all of that bit. And as I developed the spa and the treatment side, I realized there wasn't a brand out there that was suitable for those treatments. So we were using clinical aromatherapy from one company, we were using marine mud from another company, and we were using very cosmetic skincare. And that was really my big turning point. And that would have been at Turnberry in Scotland, which was one of the first spas, proper spas in the UK, where I started to develop my own product line as well as my own treatments, training school, and all of those things. I launched Spa in 1993, and really the rest is history. I sold Spa in 2017, and at that point we had 700 spas in 70 countries. We were training about 6,000 therapists a year in postgraduate. We had a factory in Somerset, one of the greenest factories in Europe, in fact, manufacturing and distributing to those 70 countries. So by then it was a good sized business. And as I say, I sold it in 2017. And then in 2018, I left and I really was going to semi-retire, but the industry hasn't let me. So now I'm advising private equity. I'm advising owners sitting on boards. I sit on the board of Amala, Trivananda, Forbes, the Global Wellness Institute, and I'm really busier than ever and trying not to be.
Thank you so much. That was a very comprehensive understanding and an amazing career. If you would summarize, because we heard already a bit about how you started Aspire, what do you think was missing at the time that Aspire made it such a new proposition to be so successful? What was the wellness world missing that Aspire just kind of really targeted, and it was right spot on?
Well, I think what it did was it brought together all the aspects. So if you looked at France and Germany, and if you like the traditional thermal, whether it was thalassotherapy or cure or therme or whatever it was, in England, it was more about beauty and cosmetics, and nobody had really brought it all together. And there were, everything was very chemical and very synthetic on the product side. Clinical aromatherapy wasn't really accepted at that time. So remember, we're talking here in the 80s. Yeah, it was a completely different time. Yeah. So I wanted to do a small compact range that was unisex, that had fabulous packaging, because most of the stuff then was in little brown bottles or quite ugly things. And nobody really before me had brought it all together. So if you looked at Europe, you had your very medical clinical spas that didn't have the holistic aspect at all. And if you looked in the UK and Ireland and several other countries, you had the beauty salons, but they weren't holistic. And if you think in the 80s, the main driver was stress. So women were going back into the workforce, technology was just starting, and airlines, also people were beginning to travel more. So stress became the major issue. So at that point, although stress still is, we recognize far more now than we did back then. Yes. And people really just wanted escapism and relaxation. And so all that touchy-feely stuff hadn't happened. If you had a massage in France, you'd be slammed on a couch that was uncomfortable, you'd be slathered in seaweed that stank. There was nothing pleasant about it. It was very good and very therapeutic. But we kind of brought the therapeutic side and the effective side into a very beautiful environment, if you like, and the customer journey and the sensory. I think still today that's really important, the whole emotional experience, sensory experience. So all the music things and the smells and clinical aromatherapy, using the olfactory system as well as the physiological side, all those things became important. And we were the first people, or I at that point, it wasn't a we at that point, I was the first person really to start to bring all that together. And I'd been very lucky because I'd had the European experience, the UK experience, and the North American experience. And also those Eastern European therapists who in those days were amazing because they had to train medically before they could become therapists.
Yes, I think it's exactly what you said, the experiences from so many different countries, influences, which made it so special. Well, talking about, we are in a pandemic, in the middle of a pandemic, or hopefully at the end of the pandemic. But I think it's amazing to see the amount of desire for wellness has, is so much accelerated. What do you see the opportunity, maybe also out of COVID, for the wellness sector, which could skyrocket it even more than it has ever been, probably also from your point of view, I would imagine?
Well, it was interesting because I feel I was ahead of the curve. Well, I feel I always have been. And that's just, I don't know, you're born with those instincts or your environment impacts those instincts. But, or maybe it's my age because I'm going through earlier than most what we're all going through in different phases of our life. I think first, before anything, it's going to be quite a dangerous time to specify because there's a massive confusion. So ask yourself, what is wellness? And what's bothering me is all the things that we knew about before COVID. So type 2 diabetes, 1 in 2 people going to experience cancer in their life, obesity, sleep deprivation, all these things have just really accelerated and become more obvious, loneliness, all the things we're seeing through our lockdowns and the experience of the last year has really come to the forefront, and I think it's going to exacerbate everything. The opportunity is huge, but as with everything, you know, you're going to get all the wrong people getting on the bandwagon. And we have to define what is wellness. I mean, I read the trade magazines and I just raise my eyebrows sometimes, because every week there's something else opening and it's all a wellness this and a wellness that. And when you look, it's a spa, or it's a beauty salon, or it's an aesthetics clinic, or it's a gym, or it's a fitness center. So that is going to be very confusing for the consumer. The real wellness destinations are going to be amazing, and it's going to be a complete new generation. And as I think we've already identified, the hotels are going to have to get serious about it, and are already thinking that way, which is good, because historically the hospitality industry wasn't good with their spas. There are huge exceptions to that, obviously, but it's taken a lot of bashing to get the GMs to really understand spas, and they really don't. But now with wellness coming into the mix even more, they're going to have to respect their therapists, respect their experts, understand that huge demand from their consumers and their clients and their guests for it. But I think before we get too far into people spending millions and billions, we are going to have to define what is spa, what is beauty, what is wellness, what is medical, what is integrative, and you can't be all things to all people. And in my view, if you've got a great spa, say you've got a great spa, there's still going to be huge demand for that. People still are going to want treatments and relaxation and all the things that spas offer. Wellness starts to go more into complementary medicine and nutrition and all those things, where you're going to need a much higher not qualified is the wrong word, higher degree of expertise, much higher payroll, all those things. And if you're going to offer things to the consumer, you've got to deliver. Yes. So if you say your wellness, what is it you're offering? So, and then from a design perspective, that's even more interesting. So the wellness destinations I'm involved in the design of are looking at the various, if you like, subjects, and designing in different ways for each of those. So for instance, an aesthetics clinic. Now, aesthetics clinics would never have had space in spas. Now suddenly in the bigger destination spas, aesthetics is becoming really important again. And that's much more medical. So the way you design that is going to be completely different than your traditional, more sensory spa. And it isn't to say that one's right or wrong, they're just different. And people experience them differently, and they want to. So they want a medical clinic or an aesthetics clinic that's clinical, because they want to know the professionals there are really professional at the medical piece. Because you know, if you're going to do invasive aesthetics or anything sort of with needles or functional medicine testing or anything like that, you want to know that those are doctors and nurses. And then if equally if somebody's giving you an Ayurvedic treatment or a massage or whatever it is, that's a different skill set. And I think we're going to have to design accordingly. It'll be interesting.
You know, I totally agree. I think the understanding from many hoteliers is taking a bit light about, you know, it's a attractive word, spa, wellness, but what does it really mean, and how do you innovate in it and deliver? And it's, for me, it's like, you know, it's about transformation, not only about experience today. It's about how can you rejuvenate, you know, your mind, your body, your spirit when you come out from a wellness, you know, from a truly wellness center. The question that I have is, I come across, you know, also clients or investors thinking about medical spas, and they try to combine it with a wellness spa. Is that, according to you, possible? What would you see as the challenge, or how far could you kind of combine them together, if at all?
Well, we are doing it in the futuristic, if you like, the next generation ones. I don't think there's anything. I think the word medical spa is a misnomer. You can't have a medical spa. You either have something medical, or you have a spa, or they can come together totally. So to me, the future is integrative wellness resort or integrative well-being. I don't even really like the word wellness. I know it's there, and I would have preferred it to be well-being, you know, so we sort of almost went from spa to well-being to wellness to happiness, or wellness, does wellness come first? We had huge discussions about that. But I think Medi-Spa is a misnomer, you know, and also the biggest issue going forward is going to be finding those experts, because also licensing is difficult and different countries. So for instance, you can't, the functional medicine side is further ahead in Europe, well, America and Europe, as from the point of view of the Germans and the Austrians have been doing it for a very long time. And there's some very good doctors there, but they can't transfer. So for instance, my project in Thailand needs a Thai doctor as the number one. That's a complete licensing requirement. And it varies from geographical region to geographical region. So the biggest problem is going to be able to find the integrative doctors, because doctors who don't believe in integrative medicine don't work in those kind of resorts. They wouldn't like it, they wouldn't work with the other therapists. So trying to get the medical mentality, working with the complementary practitioners, working with the spa therapists, with the nutritionists and the chefs, getting that whole piece working together is going to be the challenge going forward as far as I'm concerned. However, it is what the consumer is going to want.
Yes. No, I absolutely agree. What about the treatments? Because that must have changed. I mean, there's so much more, you know, services offered today. I remember we were talking about teenagers when they would just do their nails in a spa, which now has gone beyond. What do you see as new treatments? And do you think also that some of the, you know, emerging high-tech treatments are going to be innovative and can be combined with the traditional ancient kind of, you know, evolved spa concept?
I think we're going to have to define, because so to answer your question, I think the ancient, like the Ayurvedic Chinese medicine, different kind of massages, Balinese, so on and so forth, I don't think they mix with technology. I've looked at it very carefully. I think you're going to have three bands. You're going to have your traditional, that's not going to go away. Touch is so important. However, I think we have to raise the skill set of that group of therapists. I've been bashing on about that for years. So smaller menus are going to come. No fluff. People don't want fluff in the menus. Just say it as it is and deliver what it says. But training those therapists to a much higher level is a challenge. There's no question about that. Then there's going to be elements of spas and wellness that are trying to reduce their labor costs, because obviously their labor cost is very high. So the technology is going to come in that area, and also in the thermal areas. So things like the infrared saunas, things like hyperbaric, all of that stuff. And then there's some interesting technology coming out with light therapy, obviously. So, and that's all low labor cost. And then you've got your very specialist aesthetics, non-invasive aesthetics, and a lot of machinery, which is fantastic. I mean, I think that's going to have a huge place, whereas it wouldn't have done maybe even 5 years ago. But that's expensive, and it's very expensive treatment. So all your lasers, your oil therapies, your thermage, all of those things, that is showing exponential growth, by the way. So facelifts, the old facelifts are declining, and the non-invasive aesthetics is increasing. But I still think it's three buckets. I think trying to bring technology into the very holistic touch, sensory wellness treatments, and things like cancer, where I set up a charity called the Standards Authority for Touch in Cancer Care. And it's to enable therapists to get training that's recognized so that they can treat clients who've had cancer, going through cancer, post-cancer, because back to that thing of 1 in 2, those people want touch. but it has to be understood, and people have to understand how to execute it. So I think stuff like that for the therapists, education, so they do their training, then all their postgraduate modules, I think there'll be more of that. They're going to have to understand type 2 diabetes. They're going to have to understand all their anxiety. But I think when you go for your very techie machinery, which has got a huge place, I think that's different. I mean, there's things you can do, you know, there's a lot of the therapies using color at the same time as you have a treatment, or the technology things where you can combine 3 things together, but they're all a bit, and they'll all have their space. Yes. So that's back to definition, isn't it, of what you're really trying to achieve.
Yeah, so you have to really identify what you're targeting and how you're putting a program together that makes sense for your target clientele and location. And
well, Yasmin, I know it's your strength, but before I start on any project, I really almost get aggressive about it, and I've got that reputation because they won't. And I'm saying you can't be all things to all people. You have to decide what you are, who is your market, exactly. Who are they culturally, because that's going to change. Working in Asia, I mean, I think Asia is going to have a huge boom after all of this. But at the same time, a lot of Europeans maybe aren't going to want to travel to Asia. So rather than their market being European, Middle East, Asia, maybe the Europeans won't be going to, I don't know, Bali and Thailand. Maybe they don't want to get on a 12-hour flight for quite some time. Yeah. So I think defining who your market is, you can still design for the facilities to be flexible and future-proof, but defining who your market is and what you are, because otherwise you're sending confused messages, and that is a killer.
No, I totally agree. And I have another question about what would you see the difference between the city spa, which is now evolving? I know in New York is happening a lot. I'm not sure about London developments, compared to the wellness spa where it's more in a hotel. How do you see that evolve in the future?
Well, I think there's different things. I think what's going to happen is the wellness destinations, the true ones, and they're going to be more of them, I think they'll have city hubs. Because I think, when somebody is looking after their health, their psychology, their immune system, everything to do with their life, we as human beings, and I found this from my years with the health resort and things, we fall off the wagon after about 6 months if somebody's not pushing us to keep going. I mean, my personal philosophy is be the best you can at every stage of your life. Don't try and be somebody different. I mean, just be the best you can. But I know it's like diets and fitness regimes and everything. People fall off the wagon after about 6 months. So I think city centre hubs for the wellness, well, like the Lanzerhof in London, and the hotel up.
Exactly.
Things like that, I think, will grow, more of those, and they could be in hotels. So Corinthia London, when we set up Spa Life, that was to bring together the complementary practitioners. And from what I understand, I obviously am not there anymore, but I understand they're rekindling all of that. And that's a big city centre spa. However, one of the things that I really am hot on at the moment is basement spas, basement treatment rooms. And I've bashed on about it for years, but now, of course, all the information is coming through about building well buildings. There's sustainability on the one hand, but there's controlling infection on the other hand. So the way we've been building buildings have been terrible for infection because we've been closing buildings up. The windows are all sealed.
Exactly. Very bad air ventilation or no ventilation at all.
And air change. Yeah. Now, the data, I'm sure coming out about COVID, is that fresh air brings the infection down by quite an enormous amount. So I think city centre spas are really going to have to think about that. I mean, I always bashed on about it for years, but I didn't always achieve what we tried to achieve. So treatment rooms need to be isolated. You can't do comfort cooling. and the amount of fresh air coming in, and I mean fresh air, not air conditioning. Yes. But then if you've got pollution outside, you're going to deal with that. So I think the M&E side is going to be interesting going forward.
Yes, I agree. And actually that leads me to sustainability and authentic sustainability. How do you think should it be, you know, integrated into in all the projects that you're working on, or in general in the, you know, well-being sector, because it's such an important part today?
Well, the ones I'm working on really have taken it seriously. So Amala, for instance, on the Red Sea, have an amazing sustainability team from Australia. I mean, really impressive. It's not my area of expertise. I know the obvious, as we all do, but I do think it's important for people to have sustainability experts on the team in the same way as we used to have engineers and things, because it's become so complex. And especially in cities, you know, it's going to be, you know, this whole thing about forest bathing and resorts in nature. I mean, I think that's going to be fantastic. We're going to see huge growth, and people, as you know, are moving out of cities already. So I think wellness communities where there are villas and second homes and stuff like that, all of that is going to grow. Mm-hmm. But as far as real sustainability, I mean, you've got to be committed. You really have to be committed to it. And water is a big one for me in spas, you know, with all the thermal, how far do we go with that? Mm-hmm. But then if you look at Sonu's slow water movement, he was way ahead with that. And I think that should be mandatory, that we aren't shipping plastic bottles around the world. That's an obvious one. But I think the engineering is more complex. I think we need to get rid of single-use plastics. In our industry, it is difficult with laundry and things like that. But obviously there's vast numbers of towels and sheets, but there are a lot of ways of dealing with that. And I think we're a very resilient industry, as is the hospitality industry. And I think people are really looking at it seriously now. Thank goodness. But I come back to the infection thing. I think in building, we're going to have to think about that much more seriously, the health of the workforce, not just in spas and wellness, but in general.
No, I agree. I think the demand for hygiene, you know, and it has already changed dramatically. And it is not only about the fact that it's sanitized, but it's also the trigger that it gives to you. Does it feel like, you know, it's been, it's about a feeling too. It's not just about, you know, I think the reality of how you have treated a space. And that's like visual clues to give you the idea that you feel safe in a space. And I think you would have that feeling even more in a wellness area than in any other space in a hotel, for example.
I think trust, I think you're absolutely right. I think integrity, trust, the fact that people are doing it, it's not just an SOP, you know. And we've been looking at risk registers with Dr. Neil Carpenter. So risk registers for training, for spas and wellness, procedures, all that sort of thing. And I think a lot of equipment has come out that's a bit suspect. So again, people are getting on the bandwagon. So we're going to have to sort all that out and find out what really works and is authentic. I think as COVID goes along, we're just going to learn lessons, aren't we? Because it's going to mutate, it's going to change. It's not going away. We've got to learn to manage it, and then we've got to learn to live with it. And so how we build and how our SOPs are written and how we train our staff is in the same way as we used to train them in first aid. We're going to be training them in other procedures as well. It's an interesting time, and I get furious. Well, I get very cross. I can't listen to the news because everybody's trying to analyze what's happening when we don't know. It's fine analyzing 2 or 3 months ahead, but I think if you start looking at 6 months and a year ahead, something will have changed that we will have to modify. Or I think people who are versatile are going to be the ones that win in this game. People who can turn quickly, who can change, who innovate, who, you know, are looking always at the changes that are coming.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think you have to be flexible and adapt to change. You know, I always say the only constant in life is change. And I think we are all going through this. And what you said about sanitization, I've been very interested in with my team to research how can you make, you know, hotels, restaurants, bars more COVID safe. And it's kind of actually quite frightening that, you know, a lot of the sanitization chemicals are toxic, and they can, you know, they might kill the virus, but they can, you know, they might create cancer, because there's not many that have non-toxic ingredients. And we're working with a Danish company that has this amazing sanitization liquid that is non-toxic. I think that's an element that is very important to consider, like you said. And we're working, I don't know if you have heard about it, but we're working with far UVC lighting, which has been, you know, kind of invented by a Columbia professor, and to turn this into decorative lighting so that we can make, you know, public spaces on long terms more, you know, safe. Because as you said, we can't just, you know, do temporarily something, and we have to think about the future, and viruses might come back again. And, you know, it's better to be prepared than to react next time. Yeah.
And I just think basics like opening windows and having windows that can open again, you know, and for us in our industry, so many treatment rooms without windows, you know, so trying to change that. And I mean, a lot of the doctors I'm working with are saying, honestly, the safest way of cleaning is with detergent, like fairy liquid, something like that, with a weeny bit of bleach, because apparently the virus is...
vinegar also, like strong vinegar, is totally disinfectant. Yeah, there's some house I totally agree. It's absolutely like this. Well, I think in you know, in what is very important maybe in design and can change in the wellness sector is if you integrate more outdoor space. You know, you can do it in a clever way where it's within the building, so it doesn't have the wind. Yeah. But that's what I see also, you know, being a potential in the future to think much more with outdoor space integrated.
I totally agree with that. And I mean, it's interesting. I'm in Tenerife at the moment. I've stayed here for the winter on purpose to be away from it. And obviously the climate here is lovely. But when they went into tier 3, there was no dining inside. But you could dine outside. And of course, they've all got really innovative with it. Yes. And I think we are going to have to do that. And I went into the spa as well here, and they were great because the treatment room had a great big sliding door onto a balcony, and they had put the couch by the sliding door with the door open, and I felt totally safe.
Yeah, about the,
you know.
Well, this leads me to my last question, which I asked everybody in the interview. What is the impact? I mean, you had already so much impact, I have to say, on the industry and on the world, you know, in general. But what is the impact you like to, you know, to have on in your sector and, you know, on the planet in general?
It's such a hard question for me because, as you say, I'm really supposed to be semi-retired. I think for me, where I can, apart from design and, well, not design in the same way as you, the more operational design and making sure that these things work and making sure that they're what the consumer wants, because there's some very visionary owners. So that's one piece, is obviously getting the design right. But the other thing for me has always been training of the teams. And I think by setting up the SATCC for cancer training, which I hope to take to other levels, and making sure we've got these experts out there who can deal with all the psychological and trauma and anxiety that's coming their way, and helping the young therapists as well by training negative energy. Because, you know, if they're a 20-year-old, 21-year-old and they haven't lived a life, and all these people are coming at them with all these lifestyle issues. So for me, I think that's probably where I can impact most, but also just wisdom. I'm 75 and I've got 2 grown-up married sons and 6 grandchildren, and I employed thousands and thousands of people in different cultures. And people want your wisdom and your experience, and back to mentorship of women as well. You know, there are so many women. the other thing that I've always, been lucky enough to experience really is right from the bottom to the top. So I love working with the young ones, or at least making sure somebody's working with them who's really helping them. And you know, I think there's a lot of professional women now with organizations, but there's not as many dealing all the way down. I think with spas and wellness, especially in all the cultures we've dealt with, you get a lot of young women from very difficult backgrounds, and they're getting extraordinary opportunities, which they really appreciate. So I think for me, that's probably the sustainability piece I feel very strongly about. I think there's other people better than me dealing with that. But there we go, that'll be it, I think. There's not, anyway, I can't keep working for much longer.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to listen to your wisdom and the energy you have and still bringing to the sector. I thank you so much, and I hope it's inspired, you know, people listening to all you had to say, which is very rich and hopefully also inspirational for anybody in you know, in the well-being sector as you have been all your life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yasmin.